we spent time talking about vectors and vector valued functions, but we want to bring it back to something that maybe it's a little more familiar, the idea of a general function itself. But we want to expand that knowledge and start thinking about the idea of variables not of just a single, functions not just of a single variable, but rather functions of multiple variables. And in a lot of ways, we're already familiar with that concept. So if we think of the area function for a rectangle, we know that it's the base times the height. So those values, if you think of them like slider values, you could slide those values, make that base longer or make that height taller or shorter. And we can compute the area based on those inputs. And that's all that a multivariate or multivariable function is a function that takes more than one value as an input and outputs a single value. So in this case, the area function takes two inputs, but it only produces one number as output. Now we can extend that to something that we've already looked at earlier in this idea of a surface. So if I have a three-dimensional surface that's described by this equation, well, I can think of the points on the surface if that was like equal to 0. But what I could also do is by setting these values, I could construct surfaces of varying heights and things like that. But the idea here is plugging in for each of these values is actually a function. That's really, at the end of the day, what we're trying to do. And since we're talking about functions, it's natural to talk about concepts that we know are related to functions, specifically a domain. So when we think about domain, there's this very rigorous definition mathematically, but from practical purposes, what it means is take a look at your function, look at what types of values you can put in there, and exclude the ones you can't. And those are the typical values. Think like for a square root, we can't put negative values into a square root, or we can't divide by 0. You can't take the natural log of 0 or a negative number. Those sorts of categories. And so we'll use that to determine the domains, and we'll do some examples to look at some multivariable functions and see what those domains are.